Chapter 9, Shot of Reality. The puppet has cut his strings. Friend of Boxer Musketeer describes tensions with Weiner. The No Surrender crew was homeless again in January after the owner of the Greek restaurant had second thoughts about the bikers meeting in his basement. No businessman is eager to turn away patrons, and there wasn't anyone else vying for the use of his basement. But the restaurateur had heard bad things about the one percenter clubs and politely asked them to stay away. Boxer was more offended than angry, but respected his wishes and moved his crew on. He was still infatuated with his grand plans for expansion. The idea was to shore up his American support while pushing into the West. Perhaps Taz Sandham from Winnipeg could open up some doors. Weiner certainly seemed comfortable enough with him, even though Sandham was a newcomer to one percenter life. One of Boxer's ideas was to fly to Detroit on a small private plane, since his biker profile made it hard for him to cross the border via regular channels. Although Boxer was a white-knuckle flyer, it was still worth the aggravation. Once in the US, he would drive to Colorado to meet senior American Bandidos face-to-face. They would discuss such matters as Boxer's expansion plans, but the main point was that they meet face-to-face, man-to-man. That plan fell through when Boxer couldn't find a pilot who would take him across the border on the sly. The rejection didn't hit him too hard, since it would have been difficult to scrape up money for the flight, or even a car rental in the US anyway. There's truism in organized crime that you don't have to worry about your enemies because it's your friends that will do you in. A criminal's killer is often the last guy he had a cup of coffee or beer with. Whether or not Joey Crazy Horse Moore had been drinking with the men who shot him in the parking lot of Edmonton St. Pete's strip club a half hour before midnight on Friday, January 30, 2004, he apparently knew them. They managed to walk right up to him and open fire on him and his associate, Robert Simpson, at close range. The encounter ended when Moore and Simpson lying on the pavement in pools of their own blood. Simpson died on the spot, while Joey Crazy Horse made it to the hospital before he was pronounced dead. Boxer, Chopper, Crash, Beaver, Chief, and a prospect named Max were able to make the trip west for the funeral. Weiner was still behind bars, so his attendance wasn't an option. The trip was especially tough financially for Chopper, as he hadn't been out of jail for very long and was particularly short on funds. Frank Lethe stayed behind as well, as his wife was ready to give birth any day to another son, or, as he indelicately put it, the old lady is ready to drop any minute. It wasn't a full attendance at the funeral for the No Surrender crew, but it was definitely a display of respect. Joey had been one of them, having joined up the previous summer, and now he was dead from the bullet of someone who walked free. As a lasting tribute, Boxer and Big Paul tattooed Crazy Horse and GFBD for God Forgives Bandidos Don't in Gothic script on their right inner arms. Boxer, Chopper, and Lethe weren't impressed that no one from the probationary Winnipeg chapter had bothered to attend, even though they were far closer. The Winnipeggers hadn't shown much interest in the other club's events, but this was different. Club funerals were mandatory events for all one percenters, and this one was packed by television news crews, which recorded the sparse turnout. With disgust, the No Surrender crew members also noted that one Bandito brother had traveled north from the mother chapter to pay his respects. The television cameras also picked up something that infuriated local Hells Angels: a Bandito hugging someone who wore the patch of the Tiny Pilgrims Club from Saskatchewan. The Pilgrims were formed in the late 1990s in Saskatchewan as a non-criminal Christian biker alternative to the Hells Angels. Several of their members were more biker than Christian, and all of them were represented by the Hells Angels. On one night, which the Pilgrims called the First Last Supper, the Angels summoned them to their Saskatoon clubhouse. Once the doors were locked, the Angels told them they were about to get stripped of their colors, a patch with a golden cross outlined in red, the reverse of the Bandidos' colors. Angels with guns stood by, and the Pilgrims were told they would be shot if they persisted in wearing the red and gold. There was no formal connection between the Bandidos and the Pilgrims, but there was a link nonetheless as a result of Lethe's outgoing personality. The Christian bikers were brave enough to disregard the explicit threat from the Hells Angels, and soon there was word of a foot-fuck order against the members, meaning they could be expected to be kicked to a pulp if they were caught. So when the Western Angels saw the pilgrim patch again at Joey Crazy Horse's funeral, they were livid. The fact that a pilgrim was hugging a bandito only made things worse. There would be no arrest after Joey's murder, only theories. The obvious one was that Crazy Horse had been the last holdout against the rebels, flipping over to the Hells Angels. Another was more personal. Joey was loved by his friends, but they knew he had trouble controlling his mouth. Shortly before his murder, he had gotten into a confrontation in a bar and dared another man to shoot him. Whatever the case, it was easy to think about how the American Bandidos hadn't done anything to help the Edmonton tensions despite repeated requests from Canada. The bullets that dropped Joey Crazy Horse and Robert Simpson were sobering blasts of reality for Boxer and his crew. Joey was smart and likable and tough enough to walk the streets of Edmonton as the city's only full-patch bandito. His death hit the girlfriends and wives of the No Surrender crew particularly hard. Joey Crazy Horse didn't have vices like booze or drugs, and the 34-year-old was physically stronger than most, if not all of them. The women couldn't help but worry. It was as if their men and the No Surrender crew were just playing gangsters, which seemed harmless enough as long as no one else took them seriously. With Joey's death, it was clear this wasn't just a game and that biker violence wasn't just an issue in Quebec. Things could end permanently for any one of them with the quarter-inch pull of a trigger. We're all drifting towards disaster without even realizing it. Soon, there was a place of honor for Joey Crazy Horse and Simpson on the Bandidos Canadian website with grand messages like, "Rest in peace, my brothers. You will never be forgotten, and this was a coward's way of doing things." The club's Canadian office praised the two dead bikers as men who tried paving the road of brotherhood throughout Canada. The message continued with an old bandito saying that felt perfectly appropriate at the time. You cut one, we all bleed. A few weeks later, the website boldly announced that more chapters were coming out soon to Canada. No mention was made of Taz Sandham, but the Winnipegger was clearly part of the Bandidos' plans now. Boxer and his brothers weren't going to be deterred by the murders, although it went without saying that it was far harder to expand in the real world than in cyberspace. Boxer was able to make a little money off a scheme he hatched in a restaurant on Danforth Avenue in Toronto's Greek District. He, Bam Bam, and a couple of others were paid $15,000 for scaring a businessman into paying off a $70,000 debt he owed a restaurateur. None of Boxer's crew had big-time criminal businesses, like drug networks, and few of them besides Boxer had legitimate sources of income, so the opportunity to put some easy money into their jeans by acting tough was welcome indeed. A feature of 21st century outlaw bikers is that they patrol the internet with a vigilance. Frank Lenti was troubled to find a message posted on March 10, 2004 by someone purporting to be the club's former Sargento de Armas, Eric the Red McMillan, who had faded away from the club since being stabbed in the stomach in the Oshawa parking lot by the Hells Angels. "Yeah, I got fucked up a bit in Oshawa and my bros did what?" the poster asked. "Fuck all. You hid like you always do. You talk about cowards. You don't even wear your colors out in Toronto. At least I wore mine. I heard one of your brothers got his face kicked in the last time he wore his colors out a few months ago. You are so full of shit." The poster went on to say that former Ontario Bandidos were now begging the Hells Angels to let them join, to no avail. "The last of you were just wasting your time," he taunted. The internet tough guy said he would be glad to fight any of them in real life if they had the courage to show their faces. He could regularly be found north of Highway 401 in a strip club frequented by the Hells Angels, where the featured dancer was a former Toronto Argonaut cheerleader. "The problem is you guys don't come out, fucking goofs," the emailer sneered. It was troubling, but Lenti and the others couldn't think of anything to do beyond grumbling vaguely about how someone should talk shit to an official with the poster's internet service provider. Whatever they did, or wherever they went, it was easy for Boxer's crew to imagine that the Hells Angels were nearby, watching and poised to strike. That April, a man walked into a Bandidos party in a Legion Hall near Ripper's house in Toronto's South Riverdale district, wearing a Hells Angels support shirt. The man didn't appear to be tough or aggressive and said he thought it was a Hells Angels party. But the unsolved murder of Crazy Horse Morin had left the No Surrender crew understandable jittery. Could the stranger's presence be just an honest mistake? Or was he really spying on them? Was this some kind of Hell's Angels head game? Whatever the case, Boxer told the stranger to leave. Big Paul Sinopoli was still a probationary member as of the summer of 2004 began, meaning he had fallen behind Cameron Acorn, who had been fast-tracked by Boxer to full patch status in just 3 months. Being a probationary member was not a lot more fun than volunteering to be a lackey, and Big Paul had to be on call to drive any full patch member anywhere at any time of the day or night. One night that summer, Big Paul caught wind that he might finally get promoted to full status at a church meeting. Such a step required total approval of all chapter members, and just when it seemed time for Big Paul to get his reward, Chopper Raposo spoke up and dashed the idea. While others wanted to boost the club's membership, Raposo remained a hardliner. He valued quality more than numbers. He also couldn't forget how tough it had been for him to get his full patch status with the Loners back in the late 1990s, when Ripper Fullinger was a senior member of that club. Among other things, old school 1%ers like Ripper thought candidates for full membership should always have matches and toothpicks in their vests, just in case a full patch member wanted to light a cigarette or pick his teeth. Many hopeful would-be members had been caught off guard by Ripper asking, "Do you have a toothpick or do you have a light?" It was a good way of checking on whether prospects paid attention to detail, and Chopper Raposo kept screwing up back then. Now, Chopper saw himself as a guardian of high standards when evaluating prospects like Big Paul. So that summer evening, Big Paul went home to the basement apartment in his parents' home in Jackson's Point feeling deflated, still wondering when, if ever, he would ever be welcomed fully into the big club. Minutes of the Hells Angels Ontario officers meeting in July 2004 suggest that Boxer and the Bandidos remained cocky and kept on ignoring them despite the Angels' efforts at initiating a dialogue. If they couldn't compete with the Angels in terms of size or money, they could at least be rude. If they were becoming dangerously isolated in the absence of their former Quebec leadership, no one seemed to be worried. Under General, the Angels' minutes refer to the Bandidos by the negative nickname of Bandits, and note, Bandits did not want to have a meeting. Other issues on the topic discussed. By midsummer, Nina was pregnant. If Boxer were to settle down with her now, no one could say he hadn't tried to make a go of the Bandidos. But Boxer wasn't one to walk away from his brothers, even when they sorely disappointed him. For the past 6 years, 1%er clubs had been his safe haven, his source of adrenaline and respect. It was through the club that he met her. And so he tattooed Nina's name on his left bicep in big Gothic letters, on one of his few patches of prime skin not already covered with fat Mexicans or other biker totems. Then he decided to do something really big. In July, Boxer hit the highway on his Harley with Chopper in chief. The event was a natural run in Edmonton. It had a grand name. It was intended as a public display of force and brotherhood, and it was meant to celebrate a rare taste of glory for Boxer. The formidable Edmonton rebels had finally agreed to patch over the Bandidos. Unfortunately, the only Bandidos in Canada were the No Surrender crew in Toronto, which boasted few brothers who actually rode motorcycles. Wrong Way Atkinson also had a working motorcycle, but he declined to make the trip because he didn't want to lose his job as a rail worker. Boxer was enraged. Club rules said that members were supposed to have employment, but Boxer was the boss and he wanted the company. Besides, just 3 Harleys riding together doesn't look like much of a pack. Atkinson knew Boxer was upset but didn't budge. Bam Bam Salerno didn't risk Boxer's wrath, although he wasn't up to the rigors of getting his Harley on the road and riding it for days. Instead, he cashed some money from his wife and flew to Edmonton to join his brothers there. Crash also dropped by from nearby Camrose, Alberta, where he had been working at a family dairy business. Crash had been particularly low-key since his beating by the Hells Angels in the Woodbridge restaurant the previous year. It was as if he wanted to fade away altogether, if only he could, but getting out wasn't easy. Snubbing the get-together would only draw more attention to himself. Cisco Lenti hadn't been in shape for a long motorcycle haul since the bomb blast that almost killed him, so he drove west in a truck with a friend named Sam. When he learned that Taz Sandham and his Winnipeggers didn't bother to make the run, he filled the air with salty language. It was a national run, and yet Taz couldn't put the bike on the road to support it. Taz Sandham liked to talk like a brother, but he didn't bother to ride like one. Once in Edmonton, the Torontoians and Albertans all rode in a procession together, with the Death Hand Support Club out of Calgary bringing up the rear. Some new Alberta members celebrated by printing up shirts bearing the slogans Bandidos Worldwide and flames running down the sleeves. They were fine t-shirts, but police surveillance officers couldn't help but wonder if they'd been printed because the No Surrender crew couldn't afford real probationary patches for the Death Hand members. Whatever the case, it looked like Boxer and his brothers were finally moving ahead towards the West Coast. Rather than revel in the moment of victory and growth, however, the Bandidos mother chapter in Texas sniped the souvenir t-shirts shouldn't have been made without their official authorization. Things hit another sour note when Boxer announced that all No Surrender members who missed the run without a valid excuse would be fined $500. In the end, only Ronway Atkinson actually paid the fine. On July 24, 2004, Boxer was back in Toronto, and he sent out a mass email to fellow bikers rhapsodizing about his trip. It was as if he were living out a dream, no matter what the cost. The club was getting stronger, and he was riding his Harley Fat Boy, partying with friends and sleeping under the stars. He had escaped from the factory through a disability leave, and he was in love. His PBOL, proud Bandido old lady, was expecting their baby. Could life get much better? The message was classically Boxer, all capitals and no stops for punctuation. Yeah, good old time riding in the wind from town to town, sleeping on the ground, being real with our only concern is our brothers' well-being, having fun, partying, turning it up a notch, flying the greatest colors in the world. Rooster, Chopper, Chief Rome, Johnny, Big Paul, Grumpy, Jay. What a road trip. Loved every second of it. To our brothers in Edmonton and Calgary, love, loyalty, respect. Bandido Boxer. 2 days later, Boxer was still on a high from the trip, telling Chief in an email how much he valued his friendship. Chief, my brother, what did I tell you years ago one day? With love, loyalty, respect, forever, my brother. Who loves you? You came through like all Bandidos will in a pinch. Much love, respect, Bandido Boxer, No Surrender crew, all of Canada and worldwide. Only the beginning. What a ride, red and gold everywhere. The next day, July 27th, Boxer awoke at dawn, sending out an email to his Bandido brothers. It was a fresh day, and every breath was a celebration of Nina, his brotherhood, and his Harley. Every day is a great day. Gonna start to ride my bike and ride with my PBOL. What a day. Just got back from Cross Canada ride. It was a breathtaking love, loyalty, respect to those that count. 4 hours later, Boxer was back at the computer, sending off yet another email to his Bandido brothers. The spelling and grammar were as atrocious as usual, but his mood was still bubbly. People you know and trust, sometimes they're few and far between, but going through the right motions, getting to the right people, if you have a heartbeat and believe in brotherhood, there are people just down the road that can help. The No Surrender crew still didn't have a clubhouse, and that August, chapter members met at an entertainment complex with a hockey arena, laser tag, video arcade, bowling, and other diversions. There were conference rooms for corporate team building, and the facility management couldn't have known that they also filled the bill for the club's church meetings. Individual members had more immediate concerns than finding a permanent clubhouse. Big Paul Sonopoli was so low on funds that he couldn't get his Harley on the road and tried to talk to a friend into fixing it for him. Bam Bam Salerno remained strapped for cash as well, since he and Stephanie had invested heavily in renovations to Stephanie's hair salon, which hadn't yet reopened. It was at this August meeting that Weiner Kellerstein reappeared on the Bandido scene, having been released from yet another stretch behind bars for gun charges. Boxer couldn't help but be suspicious that he hadn't been locked up longer. Didn't informants sometimes get cozy deals for selling out their brothers? Boxer might have caught a whiff of betrayal, but he put such thoughts to the back of his mind when Kellerstein got out of prison, phoned Boxer's parents' home, and asked them for Boxer's new cell phone number, saying, "It's Crazy Wayne." Kellerstein organized a pig roast at his farmhouse in his own honor, calling together his old cronies for his coming out party. Tickets were priced at $20 each, and proceeds were earmarked to help him get back on his feet financially. Boxer deemed the pig roast a compulsory event for the No Surrender crew, and about 40 members and friends made the drive down to Weiner Kellerstein's farm. The drive didn't just cost them time and money, it also meant that they had to go through the inconvenience of being stopped, photographed, and questioned by local police. It was hard to think how Celestine's return made them a stronger club. Some members grumbled that they didn't want Weiner back, but they did so out of earshot and punching range of Boxer. Weiner constantly approached Bandido's friends and hang-arounds with the greeting, "Hey brother." Somehow the words sounded vaguely threatening coming from him as he pushed them to be full members of the club. "Have you decided to come our way? It's a place to be," he would say. If he sensed any reluctance, Weiner would scowl and add, in an ominous reference to the Hells Angels, "Unless you decide to be with the other guys." Shortly after his release, Celestine showed up at his old neighborhood haunt, the Holland House Restaurant and Tavern, a homey little eatery that did double duty as a used bookstore and curiosity shop. The place was run by his neighbor, Marty Argonaut, who had known Celestine for some 20 years, since the days when the biker would bring his firstborn daughter, Carly Davidson, to play horsey with him, Argonaut allowing her to ride on his bike. Argonaut considered Celestine to be a good guy biker, and comfortable teasing him when he dropped in after his release. "Wayne, you gained some weight." "Yeah, Marty, not enough exercise in jail." Celestine used to enjoy buying used books on World War II and leaving 20% tips on his cheeseburgers and beer, but he was pinching his pennies hard now. "Marty, business is not like it used to be," Celestine said. He didn't elaborate on the exact nature of his business, and Argonaut was too smart to ask. As Celestine settled back into his home, there were more parties, which, in addition to raising money for him, allowed him to play amateur movie maker. In one of his home videos, Celestine held the camera as a large, possibly drunken man climbed onto a woman. She clearly didn't want sex with him, and he clearly didn't care. The man slowly forced himself on her, as a worm might mount another worm, and Celestine recorded the event, joking that it was turning him on. When the man was done with his assault, Celestine filmed the woman sitting alone, looking upset and stunned. Celestine asked her to lift up her top and bare her breast to the camera. She balked, but he wouldn't stop asking. His tone was jovial but persistent, and he clearly wasn't about to let her go until he got his way. Finally, she obliged and hiked up her shirt as Celestine made a permanent record of her latest humiliation. Despite filming the incident for his own amusement, Celestine grandly considered himself a moral force and a staunch protector of innocence. He was still supporting probationary member Dave Concrete Weech's group, called Bikers Against Pedophiles. They were the same bunch who had crashed London's Gay Pride Parade, and they still sought to pressure the federal government to impose tougher sentences on anyone committing crimes against children. They also pushed for the government to create a publicly accessible directory of offenders who had committed sex crimes against children. Yet another stated goal was to raise the legal age of consent for sexual activity to 18. Weiner and his friends clearly loved the pose of being moral custodians. "We must surge together and show a wall of motorcycles as a wall of protection, a wall of support to our lost and wounded friends," the group's website grandly announced. "We act as a wall of protest to our government, demanding the rights of our children to have safety in their lives and security in their homes. Once these things are achieved and our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren are safe in their homes and neighborhoods, we will disband and fade into the shadows, always to be there in case we are needed again." While Celestine joked and acted crazy and posed as a moral guardian for the nation's children, it was clear that he still hadn't settled comfortably into his role in the club as Sargento de Armas, under his longtime follower, Presidente Boxer Musketeer. They may have been brothers, but a brother's envy can be the most dangerous of all, even if Celestine tried to fight the feelings. It was also clear that Boxer had no intention of stepping aside, particularly now that he had tasted the success of expansion and the thrill of power. "The puppet has cut his strings," a Chatham area friend said. Also, in August of 2004, Ronway Atkinson and Crash Cryocrasis and their wives met quietly in Toronto's Greektown for the annual taste of the Dartmouth Food Festival. They relaxed and joked, and then Atkinson got serious. The club was already running on fumes now. Boxer seemed to be floating off his own biker fantasy, a dreamland, impervious to the insistent realities the No Surrender crew lived with every day. Boxer was still glib about the threat of the Angels, blowing them off when he should have heeded their calls for a meeting. Club members were ranked by Boxer's favoritism towards Celestine, while Boxer seemed blind to the fact that Celestine was fully capable of stabbing him in the neck. The pressures of being president and the consumption of increasing amounts of cocaine made Boxer increasingly short-tempered and myopic. And what about Taz Sandham from Winnipeg? At best, he seemed an unlikely friend or savior. And then there was the Texans, who ultimately ran the Bandidos. Atkinson was the Canadian Bandidos secretarial. Yet, Boxer chastised him for communicating with senior American members. The Bandidos were supposed to be a brotherhood, yet they were forbidden from talking from their European and American brothers. It was as though Boxer was jealous of Atkinson and Crash because they had biker contacts outside the country. It was hard not to feel a sense of doom, as power struggles replaced brotherhood and cocaine substituted for good sense. Weiner Kellerstein's return from jail to the fold only made things worse. Atkinson told his friend and Crash that he was considering leaving the Bandidos for the Outlaws, a more established one-percenter club in Canada. He wanted to take Crash with him. Crash was tempted. Outlaws actually rode motorcycles, and they weren't as reckless and irritating to the Hells Angels. They were also survivors. Crash wavered. Despite his fears that something bad was looming on the horizon, Crash didn't want to let down his brothers in the No Surrender crew. The club was weak enough without his defection. There was also the matter of the $5,000 Sinopoli owed him for his used Harley Davidson. If Crash quit the Bandidos before Big Paul paid up, Crash would clearly have to eat the debt. And what about Boxer? Could Crash expect to slip away from the club without feeling the crunch of his fist? For his part, Atkinson appeared ready to quit, whatever the risk. Those guys are going to get you killed one day, he warned.